Greeting everyone. Welcome to the second Milestone Module. Today I'm going to be sharing some of my ideas on curating online content for the classroom. I like to use online content instead of assigning a textbook because it makes the experience more accessible for students and also makes the class more affordable. And finally, because I like to curate my own content, I think it's fun. And I think it also brings a bit of universal design because by using videos and interactives and different types of resources as the main content, students who have different learning styles have a better chance of being included in this design. So here we are. We were actually working for the fall rather, but I am in my summer class because this is the one that I'm actually doing right now, and I am tweaking and adding to it. So I think it's a good place to show you for an example. Now, as you see, I have a visual up here for the class overview. We talked last time about orientation information and just the way that I like to lay out my class. And I like to keep my classes uniform so that when my students take different classes from me, they already know what to expect. So I have an overview, like I said, of what's expected. I did mention to you before that my students use the library resources, so I have in here to remind them to get their library card. And then below that, I've just put down some basic information. And we know from the accessibility information from the link that I gave you on best practices that the less you complicate the way information is presented, the more accessible it will be. So we don't want to have a lot of underlining, a lot of italicizing and bolding. I have a little bit in here just to emphasize specific thoughts, but I try not to do that so much in the actual modules themselves because it just keeps it consistent and keeps it easy. I did bold here the term modules because during the fall, your modules will likely be in a weekly format, so you can just say weeks. But for the summer, where it's a condensed course, those weeks are condensed as well, and so I have modules instead of weeks. And so I like to indicate that so that the students have clear information and understanding of how the class is going to run. Beyond that, you see here that I say that I have reference materials for their review. I'm indicating that because one thing we want to do for accessibility is when we include titles for content, we want to be very specific about what is in that content so students are aware of it. And so by indicating reference materials and saying that these are additional resources just to be useful for them and to be of support, then they know that's not required content, it's just for their review. And when we get to the last module on best practices, we'll talk about organizing this even further, because I'll probably make a page where I include all these resources so they don't become like a long list here that keeps the students from getting quickly to the first module. My first module here has the dates and the title for the week. Again, this is the same as they'll find in the syllabus, and it makes it easy because I can just copy that title from the syllabus and throw it right in here as the title for the module. I have a image here that represents kind of the overall point for the week. And I have some introduction information that we talked about. And by now you should have in your classes you're setting up your title, your image, and your course over or your module overview information. And so I have that here. And even though this picture has language in it, I have provided the students with an overall or a video overview for the class and first module. I recorded this in Zoom, and then I added the Zoom link into YouTube. And from there, when we link on this, it is taking us straight to the YouTube channel where they can watch the video. I'm actually recording this outside at a campground today, so my Wi-Fi is a little bit slow, but you see they have the module 1 right here. And I give them a little short overview. And also from here, they can access other videos that I've recorded if they'd like to. So that's the first thing that I put in here. I also put in a link to some background information. The class starts in history 1865, and I believe that, you know, in order for us to start our class in 1865, we have to have a little background and context to where we are in 1865. So I found this Khan Academy video. I like Khan Academy. Their modules are set up where they have professors who have recorded their own overviews, and they have readings, and they have assignments and the links. So Khan's a great place to go if you want to think about how you might curate a class using online content. And so this professor has given history from Jamestown to the Civil War. And why I also use this instead of doing it myself is that I think it's a way to kind of bring in different voices to the classroom so that our students are hearing from different historians. So if you can find videos, I'm not big on just having images of someone lecturing at, you know, in front of a class, but if you have something that's interactive here, and I'll just show you really quickly. So as you can see, he's got his screen up and he's going to be interacting and writing all over the screen, which I think is a lot of fun. And so it's interactive for students. So I've given them our own introduction to the class where I explain to them what's required each week. I go through the syllabus. I kind of work my way through and explain how the modules break down. That's my overall video for the class. And then I have this brief video that gives them the background. Now, I told them they had to have a library card, and I have utilized a documentary segment from Ken Burns's The Civil War, the first documentary episode. And so when students link on here, they're going to have their library card to utilize that information. So if we go in and we are finding resources we want to use, then we can copy and paste those. So here I think I'll stop and show you a little bit about how we actually add resources, because different places and different resources have to be added in different formats. So when we're coming from Films on Demand or any of the film resources, when you go to add it into your classroom, you have to get the link. So you want to click on Share here, and Share will give you oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Share takes you to this page. You click on Embed, and if you just click Copy, it'll copy the link for you, but sometimes that doesn't work. And so I like to just take the whole thing and highlight it, Control C, and then I've captured it. When you're adding to your class, remember that you have to go up here and you have to turn editing on. My editing is already on, so I'm good there. To add this resource, I go to Add to Activity or Resource. And since I want the students to go to the library, I'm going to add this page as a URL instead of actually a page. A URL will link them outside to a different link here. And so if I click on URL and I add, what I do, to be clear, I go ahead and I click tap on my pad here and do Control V. That brings the link and adds it right there. I like to go back, and I like to, as much as possible, just use what is already the title for whatever page I'm using. So again, I'm going to highlight this, Control C, come back in here, click on the name, Control V, and now I have the title as it is for the actual resource, the link there. I click Save and Return to Course. And you can see that once again, that same link up here is here. And as you see, I've put in that it's a documentary. I just like to be as clear and concise with my students as possible on what it is that they're looking at. So if I link on here, it's going to take us to a separate page, a separate link. So when you just link in, and when you decide that you're going to choose to add a link, or URL rather, that's going to take you to another page. Okay, so I'm going to take this out because I don't want to have two of them here. Now for the overview module, that again is the same thing. I went to a YouTube page. I just copied the YouTube, well here. For this one, I just copied the actual address and linked that in. I also love short, brief, and concise articles that provide students with kind of a brief overview. Sometimes when they get into really deep content and 30 or 40 pages of a resource, it can be a little overwhelming. And so giving them something that's short that also kind of brings home the ideas, I think is useful. I love JSTOR. JSTOR is an academic database that we have in our library for history. And there's this free website from JSTOR called JSTOR Daily, where they have short articles. This one talks about the end of the Civil War from a more current perspective. And as you can see here, it's only a few paragraphs long. But it highlights an important point, which is that not all the soldiers were men, right? And that there were over 30,000 colored troops, African-American troops that died fighting. And of course, there were, I think, about almost 200,000 African-American troops that actually fought. But this kind of helps us think about the Civil War in a more diverse way, because it talks about the impact of casualties, not just those who fought in the war, but those who were impacted outside of that. So we're looking at a more social justice perspective. It also brings in women, people of color. And so that creates more of an inclusive narrative for us. And then digital history. So I don't use a textbook that they have to pay for, but I do like a textbook, right? I do like to have something that's kind of uniform. And so the backbone of my class is based upon this resource right here, which comes from a university of, I think it's University of Houston, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a collaborative online textbook. I love this resource because it's the historical eras all the way up to the 21st century. And these in here, each one of these titles is its own quote unquote textbook, but it's really more of a chapter. Like this gives you an overview of the Civil War as well. And then the textbook here are these different pages. This one's very significant. It's the Civil War. But each one of these pages, I mean, look, this one page is just a few paragraphs. So I don't feel that it's too much information, as you can see. But it does highlight some important points. And I enjoy digital history because it is a social justice textbook. So it's more of a current approach to the discipline of history, and it incorporates, again, different voices and different perspectives. And this textbook was written by various academics who are respected in the field, but again, also bring in those concepts that I think are important to the framework of my class. Speaking of that, in my overview for the class, I do talk about frameworks a little bit and how we approach the class. So they've got this brief video that is another historian giving them an overview. They have heard from me. They've got a documentary that might engage them. They've got a short video that kind of highlights that point of social justice. And although I don't have assigned the digital history textbook for this week, because A, it's the first week, and People come and go, you know, in the first week. I don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of hard content. You might want to, but I did include here, Digital History has other resources, and this is actually a lesson plan document for academics. I kind of like to bring in some of those resources that help instructors and share those with students so students can think about the ways that they're being taught and think about the ways that we think. And it also helps them connect with the professor because it shows that we're all kind of learning together. And because it's for, you know, academics, it jumps right into the conversation on, you know, what was the conflict and you know, the idea of it, was it about states' rights or was it about slavery? And that helps me to build a narrative where we can talk about the fact that our understanding of history through our younger education is largely formatted and has been developed around these nationalistic principles of patriotism and uh, quote unquote American ideology. And from there, we can talk about what that means for the ways that we have been taught to think and helps us to kind of jump into the idea of critical thinking. So here is just, again, you know, an interesting resource that kind of talks about the way that historians talk about history. And because this is college, I think that we really do need to just jump right in there with the higher level thinking. So we don't just go over narratives and they don't regurgitate dates and names for me. We talk about the practice of history. And so this is how I introduce that to them, is talking about the ways that historians have these conversations around history. So finally, I have here chapter 1, which is a document that I have scanned. It's the first chapter of Lies My Teacher Told Me. And the reason that I love this chapter, I use it in all of my classes, but it's about heroification, which is the ways in which we dismantle our historical figures to create these, again, patriotic like profiles of people that ignores the complicated nature of human experience and eradicates the challenges to those patriotical or patriotic rather narratives. And so here this chapter talks about how Woodrow Wilson engaged in removing African Americans from federal jobs, how Helen Keller, we know her for her young life and overcoming the obstacles of her disabilities, but we don't talk about the fact that she was a socialist when she was older and that she went to college and fought and advocated for disability rights and for women's rights. And those are the complicated narratives that have been oftentimes ignored in our traditional history. So I like to bring this chapter to help my students understand the framework by which we are operating. And so that's why I include that. So this is a file that I have on my computer. And I added that by coming into Edit Activity and scrolling down here to File. And from there, I just uploaded the file. I add, and then I put the title in. I come down here to select my file, and I just drag and drop in my file, and then it's there. So that's how I add files from my computer. Again, like the digital history was an online link, and I was able to capture the address, Control C, and then add it as a page. Now, let's say though that I wanted to include my YouTube video without having them leave the classroom. I would copy that address. I would come in here and I would use the page link down here. I'd add a page. And here I would put in my title. Scroll down to the link add, and then I would Control V, create my link. I'd save this to the course. And then instead of them being taken outside of the classroom, what's going to happen is the video is going to show up in the class. So they never have to leave. So you can add your links either as separate pages, or you can add them as videos straight into the class. And then I'm going to delete that so I don't have an additional resource there. Now, next time we'll talk about the assignments that I've added here, but I just want to point out that in the Module 1 discussion, the prompt this week, I'm asking them to introduce themselves, and then also asking them to review the resources and then take the concept of heroification from lies my teacher told me and assess the other resources so that they're already learning or already critically thinking about history, right? So the heroification of our historical figures. Now that you know about that, think about the other resources I've given you. Do you see heroification in those resources? And then from there, we can have a deeper conversation about the discipline of history. So we jump right into it. So that's the ways in which I add just resources from outside. And again, I'm layering them, right? So that there's different types of resources being included so that I can pull in different learning styles. In my module 2, we are talking about Reconstruction, which is a hefty and loaded conversation, really, about racism and federal government and political parties and the North and the South. But now that we've talked about critical thinking and putting on those lenses to understand history, not only am I asking them to think about Reconstruction, but I still want to reinforce those ideas of thinking about the ways in which we think. And so what I've also included in week 2 is an interactive. And so this is a great way to engage your students, and you can have them do an interactive, and then you can have them talk about the experience and the discussion, and that way they're applying what they've learned. So, oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so this is the Harvard Implicit Project, where you can go in and you can take these different implicit tests to see whether or not you have some implicit bias towards any of these issues. And so I just asked my student to choose one of them and to take the test and see what their implicit bias is. Because we're talking about implicit bias, though, what I'll probably do here is not have them talk about that openly, because it can be an uncomfortable conversation to say, oh yeah, I have an implicit bias towards people of color. That might not be something you want to really get out there and share in a discussion. So as I'm thinking about it, in fact, what I have laid out is a journal, and they'll do a reflective journal. They'll think about their lenses, and they'll think about what the tests tell them about their own lenses, right? We all have our identities, and we've grown up learning who we are and figuring out, who we are by our preferences and by the way in which we identify in the world. I'm a woman of color, a Southerner, a historian. I'm a football fan. I love my dog. I love hiking. All of these things. You might be a mother or a child. You might be a healthcare worker. Whatever it is that makes up your identity. All of that also are the lenses in which we see the world, and it colors the way that we see the world, for good, for bad, for whatever. And so being mindful of those aspects and characteristics are important when we're trying to do critical thinking and analysis in history. And so I have this interactive here so that they can think about that. So I encourage you to explore different types of resources and how to engage. Meanwhile, you see here that I am actually using the digital history Reconstruction chapter this time around. And then I have a primary source. This primary source is something that is from 1873. So it's a bit of a challenge to include just one version of that. I have two different versions because it's kind of hard to see something so old. For instance, this newspaper from 1873 out of the California archives, this is an actual image of the newspaper. And so that might be challenging for our students to see, but I also want them just to interact with primary sources. So I included that link. The same article, though, is also at the National Archives, and it's retained there in a different format. It's still an older image, but it's a copy of an actual print from a pamphlet. It's cut off here. But I include both of these versions so that they have a chance to access it in different ways. And I create a page here. Instead of having these links set up just directly in the classroom or in the module where it could be confusing. If I had the information here, if I had the information, like both of those resources lined up here, it might be confusing. So what I did instead was I created a page just like I did before, and this is what I might do for my reference material later, but just to show you. So I have these two links, but I don't want to link directly. I want them to have the options, and I don't want it to be confusing. And so in order to make that as clear as possible, I added a page like we did earlier. So I came down here, and instead of adding links as I did in the page content, right? Instead, I just put the information in the, I think down here though, in the page oops, let's see. Oh goodness, hold on a second. That didn't seem to capture. Let me cancel this, because I want to show you. Hang in there with me, please. Oopsies. Here we go. Primary source required reading. I have the title, and then I need to copy all this, Control C, come back out of it, so I can show you what I did. Here we go. Here we go. Come down here to add my page, like I did before. So I would add my title, like I did, and then instead of going and linking in, I just copy and paste the information. The links are live, and that way both links are here in under one title in the classroom, so it's clearer for the students. And when I do that and come down here, you see it's right here. And so the information is just more organized. It's a better organization and helps the students get through the content without getting too confused. So once again, I'm going to delete this. Excuse me. Also, I have this reference material up here in the module 2. The students are asked to start thinking about their research papers. So I have like how to write a historical essay. I duplicated this link here, and then I just drug the additional resource. Oopsies. I just drug that additional resource down and dropped it here. And so what I mean is that once I duplicated it, I'll go ahead and just do it so I can show you. Because I want them to be thinking about how to write historically. And so it says copy, so they know that it's actually a copied document from the reference section. It also says reference material. So again, that's another indication that it comes from the reference section. But dropping it down here, I'm just holding it and dragging it, and then I could just let it go, and it'll show up where I want it to be. So that's one way to keep things consistent for our students. So I have here these additional how-tos. Oops, and it should say reference material and it doesn't. So also, I have just some additional resources that I put as suggested resources. So they know that they don't have to review these, but again, it's just more information that I think is useful. Um, and so that is how I pull information from from online to curate a class content that is diverse and utilizes different approaches to education and different voices. One of the things with the textbook as well is you get this consistent voice throughout, which is very useful because consistency is helpful, but it can be mundane after a while. And when we offer up short articles and we offer up interactives and videos as part of the actual core curriculum for a course, that helps to diversify the experience and keeps it fresh. So I do encourage you to take some time to look through your content and see how you can refresh, and hopefully you'll find that this has been useful to you. And I hope that when you get to milestone 3, you're ready to add your assignments, because that's where we're going next.